Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, September 10th, 2020, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys, well, as I was looking into the accounts of the quote unquote giants or large hominids, as I like to call them, in Canada, from my previous video, I came across one of the articles there posted on Chris Leslie's website, Greater Ancestors, and I found it very interesting in the sense that it wasn't actually the accounts of the giants that was being discussed here. It was sort of the more, political ramifications that surround the giants in academia, in media, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to think about these things when you look at these things. I just thought it was very interesting to see what academics of the time were actually thinking about these things, and the interest in it being so high and everything else. Just sometime later, this seems to all get suppressed and seems to be coming from the Bureau of Ethnology with the Smithsonian, with C.W. Holmes, who was the head of that department of the Smithsonian at the time, and then his predecessor, Alice Herdlischka, would have gone over him on this channel specifically because of his mention in Charles C. Mann's book, 1491, Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus Arrived, and also in C.W. Ceram's book, The First American. And they both mention him, and they're not the only authors that mention these people as being a hindrance actually to archaeology because they suppressed so much information that they decided on their own that they did not agree with and shouldn't be accepted, etc. So they set the standards, and these standards were actually impeding progress. Eventually, certain things were found out that these people just completely denied was the existence of human beings in the Americas anytime before like 4,000 years ago. And after all the finds, after they were finding older sites in the Americas in the 1940s, at the end of his tenure there, Alice Erdlich is there, he still refused to believe it, even though all academics everywhere, all archaeologists and everything agreed about the finds, he was still denying it. So these guys set back archaeology and suppressed the whole idea of the giants. They're chiefly responsible for this. And the Smithsonian has this black eye. It has everything to do with them. Okay, if you want to know more about them, look at the videos on my channel where I go over this, and I'm taking it from these sort of popular authors, C.W. Ceram and Charles C. Mann, and what they say. These are the guys who actually interviewed and talked to all of these archaeologists and anthropologists and everything. So it's worthy of looking at and considering when you discuss these things with these sort of skeptics and naysayers. And, this article sort of addresses some of these people in this sense because several of the arguments that they use, including one that states more or less that the people of the time, let's say late in the 19th century there, did not have a full understanding of human anatomy, et cetera, which is, in other words, they were mistaking animal bones or prehistoric bones there, actually of the megafauna of the time, with to be human bones when they really weren't. So they're trying to say that they were incapable of identifying these bones at the time in the 1890s, which is completely preposterous. If you ask anybody who knows anything about medical history, I'm sure they will vigorously deny this. Okay, so these people were well trained, and not only that, they're living at a time where there's much hunting taking place. Much of society is still agrarian. Okay, everything to do with agriculture. Okay, people were slaughtering their own animals. My own grandmother, living in Washington State, was living on a farm where they slaughtered all their own animals to eat. They knew everything about animal bones. The battlefields in the past were littered with human skeletons. Knowing the human skeletons goes way, way, way beyond that. Okay, so just let's look at what this article says and what the New York Journal here in 1890 went and asked about the finding of these footprints in British Columbia. The article Chris Leslie presented here, actually before this one, is not the page; it's a dead link. So the article, I can't show you that article, but this is the discussion of it. So Chris has put scientists confirm BC, British Columbia footprints, but it's not really confirmed. It's more or less consider, not confirm, but and discuss these things. But it's interesting to read the article and see what they say and listen to what they say, because it sort of bears out my whole contention, putting all the skeptics at rest that these people were incapable of identifying the bones properly. Were they footprints of giants? Question mark. So, the most eminent scientists and college professors of America discussed the prehistoric tracks just discovered in British Columbia. To W.R. Hearst, New York Journal, I guess is a letter to the editor, who was Hearst, who's a big shot in the media back then and may have owned this thing, I guess. It is not at all surprising that the theory is held concerning giants who existed years ago. According to the views of all the osteologists who have handed down their ideas to the literary world, we are certain that animals are readily distinguished as far as nature and size are concerned by their bones. Thus, a single bone will often tell the entire story of the animal itself. Scientific investigation has gone to such lengths that when a bone is found, it is only necessary to carefully examine it, and the beast which once owned it as part of its carcass comes up before the eyes of the experimenter as naturally as life itself. So, too, when a human bone is found, it is only necessary to examine it thoroughly, and the stature of the owner can be determined. I am told that there have been discovered bones of the ancients, the size and general character of which could not possibly be indicative of anything but gigantic stature. Okay, so everybody knew about him. Nobody was making any mistakes. This is one of the things that the skeptics say are religious haters, or what, these people irrationally don't want to consider these things because they have some sort of emotional problem with religion or whatever it is. I mean, I'm just telling you, this is their arguments are aimed as such. Okay, their acrimony for the religious people and all this kind of stuff is clear. Okay, but they don't consider this as sort of mental attitude to be irrational. Okay, when considering these things, we're only considering these things from a scientific point of view. We're not jumping to Nephilim and Anunnaki, because that's a huge jump. We're just dealing with the facts right now, on the ground facts through these accounts. Okay, but it's clear that this argument, where they did not know human anatomy and did not know the human skeletal structure as compared to animal bones, is ridiculous. When they went to school back then, they learned everything thoroughly. Don't you think they studied animal bones as well? So, look, let's not be ridiculous here, okay? Now, if we find that the scientists have a tibia or femur bone twice the size of those of the present day under consideration, it is obvious that the man of whose body it once formed a part was twice the size of the average individual today. Therefore, as such cases have come under the consideration of the scientific world, it is not surprising that in the prehistoric ages there might have lived men 30, 40, or 50 feet in height and built accordingly. Okay, so this guy is really talking about the Jolly Green Giant and everything. Okay, there's no evidence of that, but I mean, he's ready to consider that. Yes, I believe there were giants and plenty of them. It is hard to think of us as a race of pygmies, but in view of scientific research in the past 10 years, we must consider ourselves so. C.J. Van Osten, Osteological Department of Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, so pretty high up academic there with his thoughts. The journal, and I didn't hear anything about the Bible or anything in there. It seems, just sort of making some sort of determination on his own, considering that, you have to also consider the people, and we know from reading all of these accounts that I've read to you from the United States so far, and Canada now, right? That this was extremely popular topic of the day, and all these accounts came to light through these articles in very respectable publications such as the New York Times and New York Journal right here. The journal last Sunday made this first announcement of the discovery of the number of prehistoric footprints on the island of Victoria, British Columbia, near the town of Quatsino on the west coast. These were believed by local authorities to be the fossilized footprints of an ancient race of giants who walked this earth during the era of the mammoth, the mastodon, and the huge beasts that have long been extinct. To ascertain whether we have at last come upon reliable evidence that a race of giants once inhabited the earth, the journal has obtained the opinions of some of the most eminent paleontologists, anthropologists, osteologists, and archaeologists in America. The footprints discovered on the island of Victoria were 29 inches long and 4 inches in depth at the deepest point. The distance between them indicated that the average length of the stride of the owner of the huge feet that made the impressions was 3 yards. John L. Leeson, a storekeeper of Quatsino, was the discoverer of this remarkable fossilized relic. He reported his find to Captain Foote, which I find hysterical that the captain's name would be Captain Foote of the steamer Mischief. Oh my goodness. I mean, is this a complete oddball here? Is this trying to screw us up? I mean, is this for real? I mean, this too kooky is beyond crazy. With Captain Foote and the steamer Mischief, who in turn informed the members of the Provincial Historical Society, and they at once instituted an investigation, the result of which led to the publication of the facts in the journal. Leeson is now engaged in the chiseling out of the first imprint of the giant foot that he found. When his task is complete, what is probably the first fossilized footprint of prehistoric man ever discovered will be sent east to be cared for as scientists may designate. Oh, I bet they would be cared for. Goodbye. To W.R. Hearst, New York Journal. I have only given to prehistoric geology a moderate amount of attention, such as might be given by any specialist to classified archaeology. From all that I know concerning the size of the skeletons discovered on classic soil, as for example, those discovered in the prehistoric Etruscan tombs, there is no evidence that is in approximately historic times the normal size of living men, much exceeding 8 feet. In these ancient Greek and Italic traditions, there is frequent mention of giants. They generally figure as the champions of, or remnants of the prehistoric inhabitants of the respective countries before they were occupied by the Greek or Italic races. So, for example, we hear a great deal of giants in some of the Greek islands and in the vicinity of Silesia, Asia Minor, and the Sea of Marmora, which might fairly be called the Cornwall of antiquity. Personally, I should not be inclined to believe in the existence at any time of human beings greater in height than 10 feet at the utmost, leaving the determination of the precise value of the evidence of these footprints here reported to the paleontologists, the real experts in such matters, and pending their agreement as to any interpretation. I should personally conceive that footprints to be those of other creatures, either reptiles or quadrupeds. The track of the bear resembles that of a man to some extent, with the exception of the arched character of the human foot. There are animals existing today whose ancestors were of large size. The cave bear, for example, skeletons of which have been found, and which probably antedate the glacial period, was an animal of enormous size as compared with any of the present varieties of bear. Alfred Emerson, professor of archaeology in Cornell University, Ithaca, New York. Okay, this is a pretty serious guy. I know Cornell and their history and whatnot, and they're pretty serious people there when it comes to anthropology and archaeology. And if this guy was saying at the time that, these giant animals existed in the past, why should there not be also large? This is what is the implications of what he's saying at the end of this thing here. Okay. He's saying in present historical times, he'd know nobody over 8 feet. Okay, but he thinks that nobody should have exceeded 10 feet in his estimate. Anybody greater than that would have been these giants. But he says there were cave bears in the past. They found skeletal remains in these bears today, and he compares the two, and these are all much smaller in size today. Okay, so it's similar to, I've been sort of relate these things to the megafauna. If there was a megafauna back in the day with the counterparts living today, similar counterparts that are very similar to these animals, only smaller today. Okay, why is that? None of these large animals survive. Well, I go over that on my channel with gravitational biology and how the gravity changed. This is the only way. When we do the research, and I also do the research on the history of human height, one of the major reasons people grow tall, according to experts, is because of their diet. Unfortunately, what has happened since the 1800s is we've stopped growing. Okay, our ancestors in 1800 are what much shorter stature, actually 10 centimeters less on average. We've only averaged worldwide average of 5'7" today, and we've stopped growing, and they can't figure out why. Okay, it's there. If whatever you can think of off the top of your head isn't why, they've already thought about those things, and they're completely dumbfounded as to why. According to Darwinian theory and everything, we should just be growing and growing and growing, and we're not, and they don't know why. Okay, so in any case, I've done the history of human height on this channel. I've been researched and investigated all these things, and many theories that people would just in knee-jerk response to this, thinking about it for 1 minute, will often be completely preposterous. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just coming up with any old thing. But the fact that the experts haven't considered, of course, they've considered all these things. They considered the way animals grow, the way a confined animal is, and when it grows, when it's not in confinement anymore, I will grow larger. But that's in an artificial environment. We don't live in an artificial environment, even though we live inside houses and everything. They're adequate space for us to get around. Of course, we have the access to the outside area, which is wide open. Many of our work areas are also always wide open. Okay, so we're at our natural state of being, no matter what. And if there are variances, they can account for those things, but they're not. It doesn't reflect on this sort of modest growth we've had since 1800, and now we've stopped for some reason, according to present day experts. I've done all the research on these things, including gravitational biology and the effects of gravitation on a human cell, okay, and in cells in general. Okay, in a weaker gravitational field, cells can grow bigger, and in a strong gravitational field, cells grow smaller. Okay, so some scientists have postulated that in the past the gravitational field was different, thereby allowing the cells to grow bigger. That's why they'll never bring back a dinosaur or a mammoth or anything. Their cells are too big. They were constructed and designed for a lighter gravity environment. And Stephen Hurl from the UK goes over this in his expanding Earth theories, and his knowledge on animal and the ratios there when it compares to gravity, and how things can be built and conceivably built to navigate in the uh, low gravity environment. Okay, so they say if the dinosaurs live today, they don't understand how they could have even lifted their legs in our intense gravity. Okay, they shouldn't have been able to. So what was going on? They say increase oxygen, but I don't think that increased oxygen would affect that phenomena to that extent, would override it. Okay, so let's hear what these professors have to say and these academics. It's very interesting what they have to say, and the politics around it, and what surrounded the giants, and what was being said and thought about by even these people in academia. So, Professor Leslie says there may have been giants. Professor William Leslie of Columbia, Ohio says the fact once established that man lived in the age of the mammoth, and conclusion other than that he was a giant, is illogical. He would necessarily have been of gigantic frame and physical powers, hard for us in this day to realize in order to prolong the struggle for existence. I am deeply interested in this Victoria discovery and will anxiously await further details. Science has not disproved the existence of man in pre-glacial age. In fact, it has proved it to the satisfaction of most investigators. The most perfect mastodon skeleton ever described was unearthed in the Osage Valley of Missouri over 50 years ago. The beast, so we must judge from the surroundings, had become mired. He was surrounded by his human hunters. They assailed him with their rude flint weapons. Then they endeavored to kill or perhaps cook him by building a fire around his mighty form. The indestructible charcoal from that fire was found with the fossil remains. This priceless find was offered first to the state of Missouri and then to our own government for a nominal sum. The scientific spirit was not strong in those days, and the fossils were finally purchased for the British Museum. A few years later, the woolly hide of a mammoth was found in the eternal ice near the Lena Delta, Siberia. This hide and the Missouri skeleton have put beyond pre-adventure the exact pure adventure, the exact appearance of the great kind of quadrupeds. William R. Leisurely. So again, he's saying this, and I asked this question, I begged this question too. If there were animals of such great stature that have current counterparts today of smaller stature, okay, smaller bones, smaller muscles, smaller size, okay, and they have direct counterparts that we can look at from the prior to the ice age, okay, in the Pleistocene era. We're in the Holocene era now ourselves, which has lasted for 12,000 years, okay. Prior to that was the Pleistocene. That's when they're talking these animals come from. Okay, and then into the Holocene, the early Holocene, they existed, and then they started to die out, and many of these animals had giant attached to their names. Okay, their cells were not designed for the current gravity; they had to die off. The other animals that are smaller, their cells were able to cope better. That's all. They were able to morph into a smaller size. The bigger animals couldn't. They could not cope. They could not get their cells small enough to survive. Okay, even a whale today has the same size cells in it that we have in our bodies. Okay, relative size. Okay, according to scientists, that's what they say. Okay, everything on this planet has the same relative cell size, not bigger, not smaller. Okay, but scientists wonder about the gravity and the dinosaurs because of our current present day gravity seems to suggest that these animals could not get around on their own powers. Too intense a gravity, they're too heavy. All right, should they say? That's why they say they're not sure. And they say all kinds of things, oxygen, maybe the combination of the two, who knows? But we don't know what the circumstances are, but certainly an expanding Earth, Thunderbolts Project, Velikovsky suggests something else happened that could have changed the gravity, because gravity is an electrical phenomena. Professor Corder says prehistoric man was formidable. Professor Eugene Corder, president of the Association for the Advancement of Science, says this interesting, if not astounding, story has attracted the attention of many of our most eminent members. Every development will be eagerly followed by them, and I have no doubt that at the next sessions of the America's Association for the Advancement of Science, there will be a series of interesting papers read pro and con on the biblical text of there were giants in those days. The association would take to the matter up for informal discussion, at least if there was before us anything more than the admirably written, circumstantial, and apparently truthful story that appears in the Sunday Journal. That, however, lacks the stamp of scientific endorsement. Mr. Leeson is not known to the scientific world. He may have made a great discovery that will aid to prove what most of our scientists believe. There is true an absence of fossil remains of man, but that in itself proves nothing. It is easy to assume that man lived to dominate the world in all its stages. If so, he must have been a man prepared to hold his own in very turbulent times. The principle of the survival of the fittest has always obtained. A race of pygmies would have been promptly devoured in the days of the mammoths. We know that the man of the Stone Age was of formidable. I can't read that. He may have been a mere dwarf compared to his ancestors. Formidable man, I guess it says. He may have been a mere dwarf compared to his ancestor, Eugene Corder. Professor McFarland looks for great results. Professor Alexander McFarland of Leahy University says, "Let us hope that Mr. Leeson has successfully quarried the rock fountain. I don't know why it's a rock fountain holding these footprints, maybe foundation. I don't know. The imprints will be subjected to the most rigid scrutiny, and scientific men will pass an impartial judgment upon their value as throwing light upon a question that we would all want answered. Were these men, let alone giants, in those days? On the truthful answer to this question hangs everlasting things." Professor Tarsney thinks the discovery very important. Professor William Hall Tarsney of Columbia, Missouri says the find of this man Leeson may be the richest contribution to scientific research of the century. The fate of Darwinism has always hung in the balance. Some of us believe that man was always, that he is as old as the world, that he was built for his time and his condition. The Smithsonian Institution people should look into this matter. Don't let every valuable scientific relic go to the British Museum. William H. Tarsney. And unfortunately for Mr. Tarsney there, okay, Professor Tarsney at Columbia, Missouri there, if it went to the Smithsonian, then Holmes and Herdlich suppressed it. Professor Peck thinks it astounding. Professor Henry Peck, ethnological and anthropological collector, says it is the most astounding discovery of which I've ever heard. It should be investigated by scientists. It is the second time I've heard traces of the existence of gigantic men having been found on this continent, but the glacial age in which they live has never been accurately determined. Otherwise, I have no doubt the investigation could be prosecuted with some degree of success. It is a most gratifying discovery, if true, because if it has been the almost unanimous opinion of scientists that the ancient dwellers on this continent were actually small, not pygmies, but men below the normal height. On the merits of Professor Binland's claims, I do not desire to speak. Henry Peck. Okay. So I don't know who this Professor Binland's claims, but maybe somebody who is naysaying it or something like that. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to read those things to you so you can see a sort of different take on the Giants here from this sort of academic point of view that the New York Journal, sort of artificially prompted here with the discovery of this thing and polled these people to get their statements on them. But I thought it might be interesting to hear what was going on and sort of debunk some of the claims of the skeptics when it comes to these things, that they didn't know anatomy, et cetera, that academics, were mistaking these things or weren't interested, didn't know about it. Seems that it was known everywhere. And if you want to know more about the suppression of the information on the giants, the accounts of the giants, you look no further than the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology and C.W. Holmes and Alice Herdlich. Okay, everybody knows it except just general ordinary people, because they haven't looked into the history of these things. Okay, so anyway, guys, I thought that might be interesting. I hope you did find it interesting. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. We go into a lot of things about this subject and many other different things on my channel, very interesting things. So all right. Anyway, guys, Bugcat7, your buddy here, signing off. And we're going to get to the Giants in international real soon. All right. Probably tomorrow. All right. Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.